We're just allowing a few people to get into the chat room, and as you get situated, I want to just draw a couple of things to your attention. The webinar series that we hold monthly is designed to share current research and to have the research elevate the discussion for supply chain leaders. The format of the webinar is a panel format, and when we set up these monthly webinars, we basically pick the best research that we've been working on, and we ask other supply chain leaders to join us in a panel format. As we go through the webinar, please feel free to enter any questions that you might have for the panel into the Q&A chat window at the bottom. You'll be on mute, but I'll look at your chat and I will bring in questions as we go through the deck. What we are doing today is sharing research, and at the end of this particular presentation, we will post all of the slides on SlideShare, and we will be tweeting about this webinar on the hashtag SCI webinar. So it's time to get started. I want to welcome you to the Race for Supply Chain 2020. Before we get started, I think it's really important for us to step back and have some context about what is supply chain and where are we? You know, the term supply chain, to really look at source, make, and deliver as a set of interconnected processes, was first used in the press in 1982. So 2012 was the 30th anniversary of supply chain. So even though we've had a lot of logistics in warfare for a long time, the concepts of supply chain are still relatively new. So let's go through the data and let's look at where we're at, and let's share some insights with our panel. Today I'm joined by two esteemed panelists, Marty Kislik, Global Operations Director of FMC, and Chris Clowes from Kosta Enterprises. When I go to London, I think about Kosta coffee. Marty, welcome, and let's introduce yourself to the audience.
Thank you, Laura. Hi, everybody. Hi, Chris. I've been with FMC for 36 years, so you might say I've lived some of that history. I've had a variety of assignments, including commercial assignments, marketing, product management, project management, as a business director. And I've headed global operations at FMC Agricultural Solutions for the last 11 years, amongst other assignments at the same time. And thank you for having me.
Yeah, so Marty, you know, FMC has been around a long time. How old is FMC as a company, roughly?
Roughly 130 years old.
Okay, and so, you know, 30 years of 130, you know, is a small amount of time. But when you think back to supply chain just in your career and you think about 2020, you know, what are your thoughts as you sit back and you look forward?
Well, I think when I look back, I think I don't know how we ever got a product to anybody and how we helped any of our customers. It was hard to imagine how we did it. Today, when I look forward, I say we have more tools than we've ever had. And what I really think about is, gee, are we really capable of using them? Mm-hmm. It's the limitation, you and me. It's us.
I think that's sadly a big factor. You know, in our research, we find that people have a lot of tools, but we're still really using a lot of spreadsheets, and we've not really adapted to the tools. Well, let me join Chris to the panel. Chris, how are you doing today?
Afternoon. I'm very well, and thank you for inviting me to join your call.
Yeah, so Kosta Enterprises, I think about Kosta Coffee, and unfortunately today I'm in Bentonville and there is no Kosta Coffee, but you know, I'm trying my best equivalent. Tell us a little bit about Kosta Coffee. How old is the company?
I very much feel as though I might be the junior partner of the conversation this afternoon after Marty's experience and the amount of time that FMC have been in operations for. Kosta was founded in 1971, Costa, about 45 years old, by two Italian brothers who brought it over to the UK, so much the junior party of today's conversation.
Well, and that's partly by design. What I wanted to do was to really get a mix of confluence of ages and companies new and old. How about yourself? How long have you been working in a supply chain role? Tell us a little bit about yourself.
So I graduated just from university about 8 years ago. I went straight into a supply chain role with a logistics company called Lora Cecere, who have just made their way over the water to the US and have just started some operations over there with a recent acquisition. Enjoyed logistics and wanted to get more of an understanding. So I think to your point earlier, Laura, around sheds and boxes and IT, supply chain encompasses a little bit more of that than just the shed and the truck. So I've been working for Kosta for two and a half years, and we're the business-to-business division. So our partners are our customers, not the end user person that drinks the coffee.
Well, you know, when I thought about my ideal panel for this particular webinar, I thought about you too, because Marty, you're such a visionary, and Chris, I love what you're doing in the coffee business and the integration with the Internet of Things and really serving the customers. But let's get into the panel, and I'm going to ask you guys to comment on your vision, and then as we go along, we're going to look and see if we've got any questions from our audience. So I want to just set the stage. Let's look back, you know, 1970s to 1980s, we had the definition of MRP and definition of DRP. We saw the rise of computing. 1980, 1990, we saw the definition of supply chain planning, the rise of client-server technology. And then we started the race for Y2K, and Chris, folks in your age group may not even remember Y2K, but lots of investment in technology. We're still dealing with a lot of that today. We have rapid advancements in connectivity, and then we saw e-commerce and B2B networks, and we had the race for the global supply chain. So more and more companies establish global footprints, and we're still in that. But right now we're seeing the rise of digital business. Marty, when you look back at that, what do you think?
It makes me feel old, first of all. Second of all, you know, the connectivity is fantastic to see that visibility, how we got visibility and how we learned to plan collectively and connect to each other. It handed us so many opportunities to design and network, and you'll hear me talk about that. So I think about networks. I think about being able to see things quickly. I think of speed, and speed, and more speed. So that's when I see that chart, I think we're able to move faster.
You know, but a lot of times we have data and we can't use it. Chris, when you look at this chart, because you're a different generation and your company's a little younger and, you know, you're more digital, what do you see in this chart as you think about supply chain?
I just about remember Y2K via the news and the BBC. I wasn't involved in having to sort any of the problems out. I think I was maybe lucky or unlucky, I don't know which way you look at it. When my early career joining the logistics industry was just when e-commerce was really kicking off. And I think that's brought around some real challenges as we go from full pallet deliveries into warehouses or into stores through to really small piece pick operations that, as Marty said, everyone wants everything yesterday, but they don't want to go and get it themselves. So it's a much more expensive operation, except no one wants to pay for online delivery. And here in the UK, you get free returns with the distance selling regulations. So how do businesses cope with that change in the dynamic and the way that a shopper shops? And then for me, the challenge is how does a supply chain deal with that when you can log onto the internet, your phone, your laptop, or even a tablet and order something today and get it tomorrow? I think the supply chain challenges for that in the UK are difficult. A country the size of the US, I don't know how you go about tackling that.
Well, you know, when I think, Chris, about some of your comments, right, I think that not only has the supply chain become more quick or speed, as Marty's talking about, but I also think about the pervasive impact on the supply chain on the organization and the ability to service the customer, right? I remember, we didn't have last mile delivery back in, the days. And so as we look at the redefinition of operations, I think we've got a lot more exciting areas. So I'm going to share some research, and then I'm going to ask you gentlemen to share your vision to 2020. I'm just going to set the stage for the dialogue. Now, when we look at the current state of industries, we've spent about 1.7% of revenue on technologies. And we've had a lot of focus on the changing supply chain. And I think that, the hope of improved operating margin, improved inventory turns, what we find is 9 out of 10 companies are stuck. What most companies have done is they've improved cash-to-cash cycles, primarily pushing costs back on their suppliers by improving or lengthening payables. We've also improved revenue per employee across industries, but not necessarily translated that into operating margin. And many of the industries have believed that they could save money in the back office and increase the front office, and we find that that hasn't worked very well. So when you look at this chart, there are really 5 takeaways that I want you to have from the prior decades. One, we've made it more efficient with revenue per employee. Number 2, we've improved cash to cash, but we really have not cracked that nut at the intersection of inventory turns and operating margin. 3, it can't be about front office and back office. I think it's really got to be about winning together from the customer's customer to the supplier's supplier. And more industries are coming up saying that they're stuck, that, this promise of technologies, of processes that we're going to give radical improvements in operating margins and inventory turns have not turned up with the promises that they have liked. So as people look at the next generation in 2020, what they're saying is, the supply chain today is traditional and tactical and cautious. The work we've done for tight integration has really made it inflexible, and many people are struggling with the lack of agility or proactivity, and they really want more of this as they become more global. So, one of the issues with the fact that growth is stalled is that people want to power the global economy. And as you look at this map and you think about 2020, most of the growth comes from areas of the world where we have the least supply chain talent. And so as we think about 2020, we've got to think not only about where are we today in the management of the balance sheet and how do we use new technologies, but we've also got to think about this building of the global supply chain, regional global governance, building operating teams. And that's not so easy. It's, easier to say you're global than to define it. And then on top of this, we have the movement to digital business. We have the Internet of Things. We have the increase in mobility. We've got social and unstructured data. We've got digital images and 3D printing. And we've got more work on e-commerce. And we were having more and more industries seeing e-commerce as a viable channel. We've got canonical integration happening in B2B networks, cloud computing, cognitive learning. I think we're 5 years away from supply chains that will test and learn as we sleep, which are going to give rise to digital business, digital manufacturing, the redefinition of maintenance, digital path to purchase, 3D printing, real business-to-business network connectivity, which will allow us to have new sets of capabilities for sensing and telematics, test and learn, sharing of assets in the collaborative economy, and truly listening to customers. And so this is my definition of digital business. And when you think about that, Marty, how do you think about 2020? How do you set your strategy?
Well, how do I set my strategy? Okay, let me do that. Can I put it in some context first? Just tell you what S&OP is about and where I'm coming from.
I love that. Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, let's do that. So you know where I've spent the last 36 years, and and where I come from when I talk. We're an industrial concern. We're a global specialty chemical company with 5,600 employees and revenues about $4 billion, and we've just purchased. In fact, we haven't closed yet, but we are about to purchase Cheminova, adding another $1.2 billion in current revenue to us. So we'll be about $5 billion in a couple of months. I've been in agricultural solutions, which is almost a $2.2 billion tent in the industry in crop protection and professional pest management, and that's what we do. So we make insecticides, herbicides, and fungicides for commercial agriculture and professional pest management. And we're very close to our customers. We have a lot of innovation. We spend a lot of money on research. And we're in a booming business of helping to feed the world. And that's where I've spent my entire 36 years in a lot of spots. So with that, let me flip over, and you asked specifically, what's our vision? Well, we have a vision. And I'll share exactly what it is, our global operations vision. If you flip to the next slide, we're a well-tuned, agile network attuned to market dynamics, driven by value creation for customers and stakeholders that delivers the highest quality products to customers. So if you really want to think about if you really want to know what our vision is for our global operations organization, Agricultural Solutions, that's what it is. That's what we want to be. So it has a lot of interesting words in it, and very important. And by the way, we have a mission, a little bit of how we're going to do that, but I don't need to share that to talk to you about what 2020 is about for us. So if you move the slides into what I think is important, so there's a vision, and if you're looking at what's important in here, well, the first thing I'm going to tell you, being an industrial concern, or being any concern, is the health and safety of our employees, our communities, and our environment. I can't think of anything that's more important. With the complexity of the world, with being distracted, with all of the things we don't control, there's one thing that organizations need to control. People need to come to work and to go home healthy and safe, and the communities need to be the same way, and the environment. And that's a tough thing to do. And if you want to know what's taking some resources, that. And we won't stop investing there. So let's move to supply chain. So I have a number of items, 5 items here that are critical for our vision, and I'll tell you why they're critical. Value creation. You sit from a supply chain standpoint, you sit there and you ask yourself, why is value creation important? It's a commonly used word. Well, I boil it down to an equation, and it's very simply benefits over costs. And if you're in an operation, a complete supply chain from front to back, ask yourself, what are your employees paying attention to? And I'm going to bet that more than 90% of organizations are paying attention to the denominator, not the numerator. And if you're delivering value to your customers, and you got to create value, and you're competing on value, because that's how all customers consider what they're buying, then you better look at your supply chain and say, why isn't my supply chain spending enough time on the benefits side of that equation? So I'm going to urge everybody to say what's important, and I think that's important, and we're going to spend more time there. Strategy. Ask yourselves how many organizations have operating strategies, real operating strategies. So if it's a few statements, I'm going to argue you don't have an operating strategy. If it's a book, people probably can't understand it. But it's more than a few pages around the globe, probably, of most organizations. What is your real operating strategy? And more important, does your operating strategy maximize your business and enterprise goals and purpose and desires? And is it agile enough for the market you're in? 2 criteria. Does it serve your enterprise? And I'm talking about operations strategy, not enterprise strategy. Does it serve your business enterprise goals, and is it agile enough to weather the market you're playing in? I think that that's critically important, and that's something we pay attention to and we're going to pay attention to more and more and more. It's really about conscious decision making, intentional conscious decision making to deliver value. I don't even know why I put this middle one, demand and market dynamics. Does it even need to be said? What's important? It sounds obvious, but when you think going forward, those dynamics are going to change, and understanding demand, market dynamics, and looking at that from the outside in. You know, you got a bunch of marketing people and salespeople in your organization, and too many operating organizations think that that's the source of their intelligence and their window into the marketplace. And I urge our organization and every organization, don't even dream that your own people know what's going on out there. They have a perspective and they have a bias and a window and a lens for what they do in their job. But I don't for a minute pretend that from an operating standpoint, as an operations organization, that's a real understanding. And I say that's important, and I think we need to find new ways. Networks, it's in our vision. I see it as one of the great opportunities. It's hard to copy. It's a strategy that very few people consciously pay attention to, but you have many networks within your organization that delivers value to your customers. And the way you put the creative way people in this world will put networks together to deliver value and speed and low cost and move that frontier. And Lora talks about getting stuck on a frontier. Move that frontier. I think that's critically important for the future. And lastly, a comment about operational excellence. It's a word that's a mystery to me a little bit. We talk about centers of excellence. What we really probably create are centers of expertise, which is more about knowledge and know-how. Excellence is about execution, and our centers of excellence don't execute. So that's not their role. So I think there's a little misnomer there. What I'm talking about here is, what are you going to be excellent at? I think we have choices to make. We have to do everything to deliver a product to a customer. Yet you have to decide what you're going to be excellent at, and you have to decide what you're just going to be okay at. And I don't think we make those choices. We try to get our organization to do everything well. You have to do everything great. And I don't think that's true. And I think if we do that, we're going to lose sight of the frontier we're trying to move forward. So in conclusion, I would be paying attention to trends like the level of data access and computing capability and analytics. I think we're going to head into the next phase of computing power, data access. We're going to take another leap. And unfortunately, we're so underutilized in what we have today at our fingertips. Taking this next leap, it's going to be fantastic, but I don't know how we're going to get past our own limitations. The nature of justification, the reluctance, the tightness of money, and frankly, there's a lot of old school thinking about investing in information technology and what it's brought about. And I think the limitation is us, humans. I've talked about networks. Everybody has a network. It's the greatest thing. Use it, assemble it, put it together, because I promise you your competitors will be doing it, and people you've never heard of will be hooking networks together to deliver value to customers and maybe even blindside your industry and blow them away. And techniques to sense demand and market dynamics. I just don't think we're outside of our organization enough. I can tell you we're not. People say it can't be predicted, it has natural variability, we just have to deal with it. I don't buy any of that. There's a lot of things to look at, a lot more availability, and go out and experiment and test it. I think the change I see that you need to pay attention to, really the last thing, is that understanding how that changes, measuring how good you are. So when you say what's a valid forecast, you say, well, it has no bias and it's the most accurate. So you always want the most accurate, right? But if you don't measure, if you don't score all the ways to deal with it and put it together in a way that delivers something to you, you can't improve. So I'm not sure we're doing a lot of learning there yet. And so I'll leave you with those thoughts.
Well, thank you, Marty. Now, what I want to do is shift the conversation to Chris. And Chris, you're working on more of a digital path to purchase for consumers with Internet of Things. Why don't you share how you're brewing up your supply chain future?
I'm just trying to collate all my notes from just what Marty was discussing. I think it's amazing that you don't think so much goes into producing a crop, and that natural variability. The Met Office has just spent £100 million on a new supercomputer to predict the weather even better. So maybe you guys can invest in that as well, Marty.
Yeah.
Well, you know, agriculture builds economies, and you know, one of the supply chains that I think is really going to really change is digital agriculture in the next decade. So, Chris, tell us a little bit about your vision.
So if we're able to just move on to the first bit, I think a little bit about Kosta and what we do. We are the world's second biggest coffee company. The guys over in Seattle beat us by about 5 times over. So quite a large competitor for us to compete against. But within Kosta Enterprises, we run full stores, a wholesale operation, and Kosta Express. And within Kosta Express, we think we are really beginning to come to terms with the amount of data that we're able to get from our machines, and manage that and to develop our supply chain and to develop our business. A little bit about our business model. It's fairly unique, although I was talking to the largest ice manufacturer or wholesaler over in the US last week, and our business model is actually quite similar. So you wouldn't have thought that coffee and ice could have anything in common. But in terms of our business model, we push our stock out to our sites free of charge, and we have a revenue share operation with our partners. So our partner gives us space, they put milk in the machine, they clean it and they collect the cash. We put the machine in for free, we send the stock out, as I said, and then we provide all the engineering and brand support as well. So back in 2011, Kosta bought what was then a small company called Coffee Nation, and I think in order to look forward at what 2020 offers, I think sometimes it can be important to look back. So to support our supply chain and the way that we pushed stock out to the field, back in 2012 when I joined Kosta Express, we had about 1,000 machines out there in the UK, where we used a number of spreadsheets that were all linked together to push stock out to the sites. And one of the key metrics in our business is how much is each cup of coffee costing us. So if we're in control of the stock and the stock is our responsibility, any savings on that cost per cup are straight to the bottom line and all our benefit. And our cost per cup was 100% out of control and rising massively. And to give you an idea of how quickly we've been growing, we now have 3,800 machines in 7 different countries. That's predominantly the UK, but we have strong operations in Poland and Ireland, and we've got some test markets in Denmark, in France. So we had to have a technology solution that could support that growth. What kind of surprised me when I joined Kosta was that we actually have an amazing amount of data coming into our business. So I think Marty touched on it brilliantly when he said, what do we do with this data? And this limitation to use this data is very much ours. So we went out to the market and sourced a new demand and replenishment planning system, which takes the data that our coffee machines send to us every night. And our coffee machines actually talk to us. So every 15 minutes they have the capability to tell us if they need a clean, if they're out of milk, if they're out of coffee, if there's a water filter that needs changing. And then on a nightly basis we collect the sales data and bring that back into our replenishment and our demand planning systems. So our new forecasting tool, that infographic, shows it relatively well, very well actually, as to what the implementation did for us. We, along with the supplier, we were winners of a European Supply Chain Excellence Award for the implementation of this software. And the benefits that it's brought to our business are that we push stock out more accurately. We can respond to seasonality. So if we have a coffee machine in a university, that shuts down at Christmas, but our motorway service stations get really busy at Christmas. So we very much manage our variables and our machines on very much a macro level. With 3,500 machines, we have 2 people that manage the pushing out across 4 countries of our stock. So it's all about managing the exceptions rather than managing the day-to-day process. And then looking forward to the future, I think if we can move on to the next slide, we've recently introduced a brand new machine, the one you can see there. We've exhibited in the US twice, over up in New York in NSF, and we're trying to really enhance the data that our machine, this new machine, can provide us. From a sensory point of view or from a consumer point of view, Laura, you mentioned before about the customer's customer. So although our customer might be a petrol station, we're acutely aware of what our customer's customer, the end user, is after. So this machine has the capability to push out a scent when you make your cup of coffee. It plays music to give you the experience of being in a coffee shop. It has wave and pay rather than, as well as chip and pin. I think already we're challenging ourselves, well, how do we pay via PayPal, using the screen and interfacing with other opportunities or other options in which we can collect cash. And one of our biggest pride, or one of the things we're most proud of with this machine, is it's actually designed by Pininfarina, the guys that design Ferraris. So we can definitely call this the Ferrari of the coffee world. We recently kicked off a project, which is about our vision for 2020, called Project Grid. We have all this data coming in, 3,500 machines telling us all the time how they're performing. Well, again, you mentioned about the back office and the front office being integrated. The front office is that brand new sparkling machine. What we now have to do is to make sure our back office can cope with all of that and bring those two closer together. So our vision for 2020 is to create a digital platform for our partners, our customers, our suppliers, and our suppliers' suppliers, as well as our distributors, to drive efficiency at the machine and getting stock out to it, but also the interaction. So we do have the capability that there's a camera from Intel built into this machine that could recognize your demographics, so we can then drive promotions when we're talking to consumers. And therefore, with that kind of information, we can empower different user groups and interact with them in a different way that we do at the moment. The second point is that we want to unlock the power of our data. We currently have information every 15 minutes, so that machine could go 14 minutes without having milk in it before we even know about it. How do we get into, and our sales information is only sent to us every 24 hours. What would the benefit be of actually being told every minute, every second, how that machine is performing and what we can do to interact, ring the partner, get some milk in, and then how could we use real intraday data to drive sales or drive promotions? So the guy before you had a caramel syrup. Would we want to use that information to say, you know what, why don't you try a syrup as well as you approach that machine? And just a small side note, for some reason over in the US, you guys really seem to like our strawberry vanilla lattes, which doesn't quite go down quite so well down here when I'm talking about syrups. And then thirdly, how do we enhance the end consumer experience? I think our machines talk to us, but they're only using 2G technology. We're already rolling out 4G, and what comes after 4G? So as much as we think as we're at the forefront of communication and technology, how do we actually move on to and keep up with the advancements in technology? And Marty, you said, I think, one of the limitations of how we can use this is us. I'm relatively young, I've just turned into my 30s, and we were in a school the other day looking at how we can develop the engineers of the future. And the way that they interact with their iPhones and these guys are just 14, 15, they're going to be joining the workplace soon. And already at 30, I feel as though I'm behind. So I think that end consumer experience is how do we really keep these kids engaged as they become the next workers in just 5–10 years' time? So the final 3 slides just give some ideas as to what we're looking at in the future. It's fair to say that Amazon already do this, so they do in the UK with their online support with their Amazon Fire, I think it is. But what if, rather than having to ring a site, we could get a minute-by-minute update as to how a machine is performing, and then we appear on the screen and say, hey, we need to fix this machine and get it trading again, helping reduce the downtime and maximising the sales opportunities, and also customer enjoyment of the machine. I've done it myself. You go up to a machine and it's not working, and it's the most frustrating thing in the world when you're stuck there for a coffee. So how can we keep our machines trading for longer? And about 2% of our estate is not working at any one time. With 3,000 machines, that equates to a lot of lost sales opportunities. With 10,000 machines, that number obviously increases threefold. Moving on to the next one, I think it's about how do we really maximise the opportunities and improve the impulse purchase. Lots of our machines are in train stations and airports, major travel hubs. Imagine if we could tie into the fact that a train was delayed for 10 minutes and then pop up a sign by a machine on a platform that says, you've got an extra 10 minutes, why don't you grab a coffee? I know I'd grab one, but maybe I'm biased. And I think thirdly, the final one that we are looking to do is how we can engage with our end users is digital coffee club. So we have a loyalty card, as many customers and companies do. How can we get that loyalty card working with our machine, and then knowing that if a consumer approaches who likes to buy a syrup, you set the machine up to say, would you like your usual if you can scan your loyalty card? And I think I'm conscious that this is a supply chain discussion, but for the supply chain of 2020, I think I have to understand what our business of 2020 is going to look like. If we could get into minute-by-minute update of sales, how do I maximise the efficiency of our stock and our supply chain to maximise those sales if we have intraday visibility? Equally with spare parts, if I know that a machine is broken down, how do I get spare parts to that machine even quicker, or on the back of engineers' vans turning down or reducing our inventory stock holding? So the 3 priorities for us, I think, in summary are extending the source of our data, so getting more data and making use of it, but also making sure, secondly, that that's quality data. There are times when our machines stop talking to us and we don't know what's happening. So how do we make sure that we're getting 100% of our machines talking to us 100% of our time? And then finally, the time that it takes to capture that data. We currently report every 15 minutes and our sales every 24 hours. What would the benefits be if we could get that data on a minute-by-minute basis? So that's what Kosta is looking to do in Kosta Express over the next 5 years.
Awesome. Well, you know, when I pick these case studies, Marty, you're in a very traditional company which is in an industry that's changing with digital agriculture, and Chris, you are a different generation and you're in a more fast-moving consumer-based company. You know, supply chains mean very different things, but I think both organizations are dealing with how do I use data differently, how do I really move from an inflexible supply chain to a more agile one. Marty, when you look at this chart, which are the current pains in supply chain management, and you think about your strategy and you think about what you're doing and what Chris is doing, what do you see here, and what do you as a supply chain leader need to work on to really drive that vision for Supply Chain 2020?
Yeah, my head's still spinning about Chris's comments, and I see speed, and I say, well, I was left with, and you're asking me to comment on a slide, and I'm still left with how do we get as connected as Chris and his organization is to that customer or that farmer in the field, and that connectivity, and what would that mean for us? And
yeah.
But,
well, you know,
but when I look at it, it's hard to switch gears here.
Okay.
So pain in supply chain. I turn this around a little bit. Obviously, I participated in this, so I'm somewhere in there in my comments. But I try to look at it in terms of opportunity a little bit. Volatility, the pain of volatility is the what about the opportunity of volatility? Mm-hmm. What can I do faster, better, smarter? I can't do anything about the fact that things move. In fact, I can only take advantage of that. And if it was all stagnant, we wouldn't even have it would be a non-competitive subject. So I switch this around a little bit and try to, when I think about visibility, I hope Chris is right. I hope the generations that are in our supply chains today and those coming can take information to another level. Unfortunately, the people with the money and controlling things and justifications are a lot older and a lot more skeptical. I almost want to just take my entire technology, information processing and sensing and hand it to a bunch of 30-year-olds and say, here, go do something with it unconstrained, and here's a pile of money. I'm sure they'll do something better than what I'm doing with it at the moment. So I look at this much, much more opportunistic, tremendous opportunities in those top couple of bars.
Yeah. Chris, how about yourself? You know, one of the things that you were talking about is the use of data, and, you know, you represent a different generation with more of a digital vision. What do you think the biggest challenges are, and how are you going to overcome them?
I think Marty made a really good point there about giving the IT spend to a bunch of 30-somethings. And it's interesting that in another part of Whitbread's made up of two. It's got Kosta Coffee and Premier Inn. Premier Inn is a budget hotel brand here in the UK. And we've just launched a new concept called The Hub, which is a fully integrated hotel room where your mobile phone becomes your key. You can hold it up to the skyline and you can see where to go and visit. The room is tiny. It's 12 square meters. Has a double bed in it, but has a 40-inch TV. So I think the use of technology in the future and giving it to a load of 30-somethings is probably a really good idea. But I think I touched on a little bit lower down on some of within that chart, the challenges for us is how do we use data, that accessing to data, making sure it's clean and compliant. And going out to schools, you talk about how do we get them into engineering. I think that the talent issue with a shortage is very, very few people choose to come and work in supply chain. I think that lots of people seem to just fall into it. And it's how do we get people really excited about, if I order it at 10 p.m. today and I get it delivered by tomorrow, it's a supply chain that delivers that, and that should be really exciting to people because they buy into the next day delivery. And then lastly, again, Marty, you mentioned that the supply chain team, an understanding of that, I think that how do you get people in the executive team to say that it's worth investing $1, $2, $3, $4, $10 million in a supply chain solution, or however much it is, because it's going to deliver some real business benefit, rather than the company's website or an ERP system where money traditionally gets invested.
Right. Yeah, I think that's the challenge, and you know, it's how do we change that conventional thinking. You know, I was talking to a next-day delivery company who's using Flywheel for the holidays to basically put packages in the trunks of cabs, right? And that was driven by, you know, 30-year-olds who said, you know, we've got all these taxi cabs running around New York, let's deliver packages, you know. So I think, you know, our mindsets and our conventional spending and ERP and those kind of technologies is a barrier. And I like the idea of let's give some money to the 30-year-old kids. You know, when we look at this, you know, business continuity risk is high as we think about the next 5 years. And we actually have a question around supply chain visibility. We've seen improvements in supply chain visibility in the last 15, and we're starting to see the building of business-to-business networks, canonical infrastructures, and cognitive learning in these business networks. Marty, any insights about supply chain visibility and business networks and where you're going to invest money there to build your networks for the strategy, or are you still thinking about it?
Oh no, I think we've made tremendous strides in visibility. In fact, I'm almost walking away from it a little bit and thinking more about networks. I actually think people are going to put together networks that are going to blindside us. And when I say blindside us, I mean people who are heading down their path, and somebody will put together a series of suppliers or technology or other things. Customization is experimentation and customization. The cost of customization is going to plummet. Technology is going to bring that. I think collaborative, whether you talk about collaboration, and when I think about network, I think about collaboration. So to me, a collaboration is a network of things you pull together. So I kind of, as this thing says, areas of decreasing risk, I actually think that's right. And I actually look at increasing risk, complexity, and regulatory compliance. It depends what industry you're in. But those things are huge. And dealing with complexity could very well be a technology subject and an information subject. Certainly for every company, as we pursue things, we go through cycles of increasing complexity before we have to reduce it. So I think that I just don't think visibility is the subject it was. Mm-hmm. I do think reaching out into the, I think speed, complexity, and putting together what's available, whether it's information, partners, talent, skills, putting a network together, a complementary collaborative network is the way it is. I don't know if it's risk reducing, but it's sure as heck where I think the opportunity is.
Yeah. Now, Chris, it was interesting that you were talking about reducing the latency on your machine to 15 minutes, and you're still working on that. And the data and reducing latency and demand volatility to really try to streamline that. One of the things I find in working with younger companies and also a generation different is you understand the issues around latency, and you don't accept that data is late, and you want to run businesses at the currency of data. How are you finding that in your organization, in organizational alignment around demand variability, currency of data, Internet of Things? How did you get people on board with that?
I think we were quite lucky in that I think when Kosta bought Coffee Nation, Coffee Nation was a company that was set up in the late 1990s. A chap called Scott Martin, who Coffee Nation was a venture capitalist-backed business. He mortgaged his house 5 times over to make sure he had the money, and he saw this gap in the market and realized that self-serve coffee bars, and thought that, well, the only way that we can know if our brand is being protected is if our machines talk to us. So I was actually quite lucky that I think I've joined a company where Coffee Nation in itself is only 12, or Costa Express in itself is 3 years old as a brand, and the company itself and the technology is only 12, 13 years old. So both myself and people that join the business now are lucky that they joined a company that 12 years ago saw that it's important that we know what machines are doing, and people are now talking about the Internet of Things and big data. Well, it doesn't really get much bigger than 3,500 machines talking to you every 15 minutes, let alone anything else. So I think one of our challenges as a business is how do we take that technology and implement it into Kosta, actually, as a wider organisation. So it's the one thing where I think our Seattle coffee colleagues are probably ahead of us, is that Starbucks embraced technology quite quickly. Their traditional demographic is quite a younger person, so that they have to. But I think for us our challenges we need to get Kosta Express into a base where our back office and our front office are much closer together. But then how do we spread that throughout the wider organisation? And it's great to see Premier Inn with their new brand, the Hub, taking on that technology to another level. And then I think one of the challenges will be, well, how do we just keep up with that? So already in Kosta Express we're behind because we're just using 2G and we're moving on, how do we get onto 4G? So how does Kosta Express, Kosta, Premier Inn in the Hub and the areas of our business actually just keep up with the pace of change? So I think we're quite lucky in that we have a relatively simple business. I think, Marty, you mentioned do your core thing great. Well, we're a coffee company, we're selling coffee, and that's all Kosta Express does. So as a business we're relatively incomplex, but how do we keep up with technology which is going to drive just more and more complexity as, or you talked about customization. I mean, you could never go up to one of our machines and ask for a soy latte with a triple shot of syrup, of hazelnut syrup. Well, how do we make it do that? So that that customization can be driven for every single consumer.
Yeah, we've got to close here, and I love the dialogue. I mean, Marty, I want to ask you a question, because I work with a lot of companies, and many of the companies are, more established companies like FMC. And then I work with a lot of startups, like, we have with Kosta Coffee. And, my question for you is, are we really challenging ourselves enough, as we think about supply chain and we think about the Internet of Things and we think about the digital supply chain and digital business? Are we challenging ourselves enough? And how much change can organizations absorb? And are we going to, older companies become more dinosaur-like, perhaps, Kodak or, companies that don't exist anymore? What are your thoughts here? What do we do?
What do we do? Well, are we going to become dinosaurs? I think the potential to become a dinosaur is increasing, and it's increasing because of collaboration, because of information, because of technologies, and people are putting technologies together in new ways. And I think, yes, you can get blindsided, and I think you can. I would suggest, and I do think we're a little staid, no matter what industry or where you are, whether you're an old industrial concern or whether you're progressive. I would look outside. What I like to do is go somewhere else, go to another industry, go to someplace, listen to people like Chris. I mean, I'm in a totally different business, and I get ideas from this conversation already. Go explore things and cherry pick things, think about it, stimulate yourself outside of your industry, outside of your business. If you're looking for the answer inside your business, I think that's hard to find. I think there's so much going on out there that you have to bring something in, and the second thing I would say is go out and look in other places. There's so much interesting things in the world, supply chains to look at. Bring it in find out ways it can apply, and then experiment. You said, and I'm taking a page out of your book, you said that go experiment. Cost of experimentation is reducing. Run models, run tests, run experiments, run little things, give people money to just muck around, particularly young people who are unconstrained by convention in your existing organization. Get them to explore what's going outside, bring it into your company. If you don't do that, I think you do have a chance of becoming a dinosaur and getting slower.
Yeah, and getting slower. I actually did an interview with CIO Magazine the other day, and I said one of our biggest barriers for Supply Chain 2020 is the fact that every project has to have a defined return on investment and new forms of analytics and some of these new technologies. It's innovation, it's trial, it's about what could be, and when we constrain everything to have a defined ROI, we limit our future. And the editor took issue with me, and I don't think he's going to publish my article. What do you think, Chris?
I think putting the Kosta aside, I was on holiday recently and I read how Google works. I think it was either Eric Schmidt or Larry Page, the author. And they said with their employees, they have a 80-20-10 rule, which I thought was interesting that it made 110%. But they were saying that 20% of their employees' time, they insist that they work on stuff that has nothing to do with their day job. And you look at some of the innovations that Google is putting out, and they talked about some of the stuff that had failed, actually, and that I can't remember any off the top of my head because I never used them. But they were saying we have lots of really good successes, but we've got lots of failure as well. So if you look at a company like Google and the successes that they've had, and I think you have to be prepared to invest that time, that money, and that effort to look at the future. And I think despite the speed that we think we move at, one of my colleagues left recently, and I went back and met up with him 6 months ago or later, and we were still talking about the same things 6 months later. And I think it's incredible that as quickly as we think we move, actually, we're not really moving that quickly. Which I think is interesting.
Yeah. Well, I want to thank Marty and Chris for joining us today. We will be continuing our web series on the future of supply chains. We'll be doing monthly webinars. The webinar in December is on the infographics and the research insights that we have harvested from our research surveys in 2014. And in January, we'll be sharing panel views on where are we on demand-driven and market orchestration and the building of horizontal processes. The monthly webinar series is a countdown for our global summit, which will be held in September at the Phoenician, where we'll do just what Marty said. We'll actually put the case studies on stage of supply chain leaders that are stretching the bounds of technologies and processes from all different industries, and we'll allow supply chain leaders to really think about the future and imagine what it could be with wearables and manless vehicles and Internet of Things and cognitive learning and new forms of analytics. We want people to think differently. We want them to be able to seize the opportunity of the next evolution of supply chain. So Chris and Marty, thank you very much for joining us today. I hope to see you at the Phoenician in September. Thanks.
Thank you, Laura.
Thank you for the invite.
Thank you.